He didn't need to know her name. But when she turned back with tears in her eyes and a whisper of gratitude on her lips, something cracked open in his chest, something he'd buried for years. Albert Jennings, 78 years old and nearly invisible to the world around him, had only gone to the store that morning to buy bread and eggs. Nothing more. Nothing emotional. Nothing meaningful. That's how he liked it: simple, predictable, quiet. But that day, the quiet broke. Standing 2 customers ahead of him was a young mother, fumbling in her torn purse, her toddler wailing in the cart. She looked maybe 28, but the weight on her shoulders aged her. A small carton of milk, a pack of diapers, a few bananas, a loaf of bread. The total, $22.46. The contents of her wallet, mostly lint and coins. Her cheeks flushed as the line behind her grew restless. "2 thought I had more in here." Albert watched, silent, observing. That instinct of his, the one he thought he'd outgrown after his wife passed, came alive. He stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you'll allow me." "No, please," she said quickly, clearly humiliated. "I can put some things back." But he was already pulling out a 20 and a 5, his hand trembling slightly. "Let me help. It's not a handout. Just a hand." She looked up at him, startled, eyes welling. She didn't say thank you immediately, just stared, as if trying to understand why a stranger would care. Then she whispered it, barely audible. "Thank you." He nodded once, quietly, then turned to pay for his own meager groceries. By the time he left the store, she was gone. He didn't think much about it afterward. Not really. Or at least, he told himself that. But when he sat down that night in his silent kitchen, the weight of her gaze stayed with him. That whisper of thanks. The way her child had reached for the milk like it was Christmas. He hadn't told anyone, not that there was anyone to tell. His wife had been gone for nearly a decade. His son, well, the less thought about that, the better. They hadn't spoken in 4 years, not since that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. Albert had grown used to his routines, to the dusty silence of his home, to the rusted mailbox and the creaky steps. Acts of kindness. Those belonged to a different chapter in his life, a time when love was abundant and giving was effortless. So why had this moment clung to him? 3 days later, it was raining. Not a drizzle, but a summer downpour that soaked the earth with conviction. Albert was sitting on his porch, wrapped in a sweater too thick for July, when he saw her again. The young woman. Same face. Different clothes, cleaner this time. Her hair pulled back, a small umbrella above her. And in her hand, a brown paper bag. Albert sat up straighter. She approached slowly, cautiously, like she wasn't sure if she'd be welcome. But there was a look of purpose in her eyes. She was carrying something more than groceries, something heavier. "Mister, I don't know your name," she said, standing at the foot of his porch steps. "Albert," he said. "Albert Jennings." She smiled, thinly. "I'm Kara. I wanted to thank you properly. For what you did." "You already did." "No, I mean it. I came back to the store to find you. They told me where you lived. I hope that's not weird." Albert chuckled. "Depends what you brought in that bag." She smiled again, more fully this time, and handed it to him. Inside was a small loaf of banana bread, still warm, and a card. Handwritten. Personal. He read it in silence, then looked up at her, eyes soft. "You didn't need to." "I did. Because I wanted you to know you changed something that day." Albert tilted his head. She stepped up onto the porch, gently. "I was going to return the milk and the diapers. I didn't have enough cash, and I wasn't sure how I was going to make it through the weekend. My son's father is gone. My parents don't speak to me. It's just me and him. And I've been trying to do everything right. But that day I was ready to give up." Albert's breath caught. He looked at the rain dripping from her umbrella, the damp in her hair, the fire in her eyes. "I was ready to give up," she repeated. "And then you didn't let me." The silence stretched. Long, soft. "You remind me of my wife," Albert said suddenly. "She would have done what you did, come back. Not just because it was right, but because it was kind." Kara sat down beside him. For a while, they didn't say much. Just listened to the rain. until she pulled something else out of her bag. A small folded paper. I also came to give you this, she said. It's an invitation. To what? She smiled. To possibility. Albert raised a brow. I've been accepted to a training program for single mother childcare, life skills, a real shot at a job. I almost didn't apply. But after what you did, I thought maybe the world wasn't done with me yet. He looked at the paper, then at her. And I want you to be there. When I graduate. If you want to. Albert looked down at his hands. Hands that had known hard work, loss, love, and now unexpected purpose. I'll be there, he said quietly. Wouldn't miss it for the world. And for the first time in a long time, the rain didn't feel cold. Kara didn't stay long that rainy afternoon. She left the porch with a promise to keep in touch, her umbrella bobbing as she disappeared down the sidewalk. Albert stood at the door longer than necessary, watching her figure retreat into the curtain of rain. Something in him felt lighter. A knot he hadn't even realized existed had begun to unwind. That evening, he placed the card she gave him on the kitchen shelf, right next to the faded photo of his wife, Margaret. Her eyes smiled at him through the frame. She would have liked her, he murmured aloud. The days that followed were different. Where silence had once filled every crevice of the house, Albert now found himself listening for the chime of his doorbell. He found himself watching the road when he watered the potted geraniums. He even cleaned the guest room, not that he expected company, but because it felt like something he ought to do. Then, a week later, Kara returned. This time, she wasn't alone. Mr. Jennings, she said, holding her son on her hip. This is Oliver. The little boy peered at Albert with wide, curious eyes, clutching a stuffed giraffe to his chest. He looked healthier, brighter, somehow like the cloud that once hung over them had started to lift. Hi there, Oliver, Albert said gently. Oliver didn't speak, but reached a small hand toward him. Albert bent down, letting the boy touch his wrinkled fingers. The contact was brief, but it made something stir deep in Albert's chest. I hope you don't mind, Kara said. I just thought maybe we could visit. I don't mind, he replied. Come in. I just made some tea. That visit became the first of many. Sometimes they stayed for half an hour. Other times, the entire afternoon drifted by with Kara chatting about her training program, while Oliver played with the wooden blocks Albert had dug out of his attic, his son's old toys, cleaned and polished like new. Albert listened more than he spoke. But every now and then, he'd offer a story from his past. He told Kara about the farm he grew up on, how he met Margaret at a church picnic, how he once fixed up a '65 Mustang with his son before everything fell apart between them. She listened like it mattered. Like he mattered. One afternoon, Kara looked at him seriously and said, You know, I never really had a father. Not one who stuck around. But if I did, I'd want him to be like you. Albert didn't know how to respond. His throat tightened too much to speak. So he just smiled, gently, and passed her a cup of tea. Then came the envelope. It arrived one late August morning, slipped under his front door. Inside was a crisp invitation printed in gold ink. Graduation Ceremony Women's Lifebridge Program. Honoring Kara Daniels, Class of 2025. Guest of Honor, Albert Jennings. His hands trembled as he read it. He'd never been a guest of honor for anything in his life. Not for birthdays. Not for retirements. Not even for his own son's wedding hadn't been invited. He wasn't sure he deserved it. But he also wasn't sure he could say no. The ceremony was held at a modest hall downtown. Rows of folding chairs, a makeshift stage, a podium. It wasn't grand, but to Albert, it felt bigger than any church cathedral he'd ever stood in. Kara was radiant. Her dark hair flowed past her shoulders, and her dress was simple but elegant. Oliver sat on her lap during the first half of the ceremony, squirming and giggling, until one of the volunteers whisked him away with a juice box and coloring book. When Kara's name was called, Albert stood and clapped louder than anyone. She stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and spoke. When I walked into that grocery store 2 months ago, I thought I had hit bottom. I was exhausted, broke and ashamed. And then a man I didn't know did something I didn't expect. Her eyes found Albert in the crowd. He didn't just pay for my groceries. He reminded me that I mattered, that I wasn't invisible, that kindness isn't extinct. That changed everything. Albert felt his eyes burn. He blinked quickly, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. I started to believe in myself again. And today I graduate. But more than that, I hope to pay forward the kind of grace I was shown. Mr. Jennings, thank you for seeing me. The entire hall turned to look at Albert. He sat stiffly, awkwardly, until someone behind him gently tapped his shoulder and said, "Stand up, sir." So he did. The applause that followed didn't feel like it was only for her. It felt like it was for them. That night, back home, Albert stared at the certificate Kara had framed and given him. It read, "To Albert Jennings, in gratitude for reminding a stranger that kindness can save a life." He hung it beside his wife's photo. "You always told me I'd find purpose again," he whispered. And just as he turned to switch off the kitchen light, there was another knock at the door. Kara stood there, this time not with groceries or invitations, but with tears streaming down her cheeks. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping forward. She held something out. A thick envelope, torn at the edges. Inside was a letter. "It's from Oliver's father," she said shakily. "He wants to fight for custody." Albert felt his jaw clench. "I don't know what to do," she continued. "I'm scared, Albert. I don't have money for a lawyer, and You're not alone," he said, steady and firm. "You've got me." She collapsed into his arms then, sobbing into his shoulder. That night, over tea and soft words, they made a plan. Albert might not have known the ins and outs of custody battles, but he knew how to stand beside someone, how to show up, how to fight, not with fists, but with quiet, unwavering love. And this time, he wasn't going to lose another child to silence. He was going to fight with everything he had for a boy named Oliver, and for the mother who never gave up. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, legal consultations, and late-night phone calls. Kara was doing everything she could, applying for legal aid, collecting evidence, writing statements. But it was Albert who gave her the courage to keep going. "I'll come with you to every hearing," he told her. "You won't walk into that courtroom alone." And he did. Every time. He sat behind her in a stiff wooden bench as she explained to a skeptical judge why she deserved full custody. He held her hand during recesses when her ex's attorney tried to rattle her. And after every session, he took Oliver out for ice cream, rain or shine. Oliver adored Albert. He started calling him Gramps one evening, unprompted, while they were watching cartoons in the living room. Albert nearly dropped the bowl of popcorn in his lap. "Gramps," Oliver repeated, looking up at him with those big, trusting eyes. "You are my Gramps, right?" Albert didn't respond for a long second. He just looked at Kara, who was sitting on the armrest, her eyes already shimmering. "If it's okay with your mom," Albert said finally, "then yes, I'd be honored to be your Gramps." And just like that, the hole Margaret had left in his life began to close, not because she was forgotten, but because someone else had come in who needed him just as deeply. Kara's ex, Darren, didn't give up easily. He painted her as unstable, directionless, and incapable of raising a child alone. He had a better job now, he claimed, a stable girlfriend, a 2-bedroom apartment. But Albert saw the truth. Darren wasn't interested in Oliver out of love, was interested in control, in pride, in punishment. "He just wants to win," Kara said, pacing Albert's living room. "He doesn't even know Oliver. He didn't visit him once after we left." "I know," Albert said calmly, sipping his tea. "That's why we keep showing up. Not for the judge. Not for Darren. For Oliver." "But what if I lose?" Kara asked, her voice small. "What if I fail him?" Albert leaned forward and took her hand. "Then we'll start again. We'll appeal. We'll fight harder. But you won't lose. Not with love like this behind you." She broke into tears again, and this time, he didn't just hold her. Honda stood up and wrapped her in a warm, steady embrace. the kind only years of heartbreak and healing could form. By early October, the final hearing approached. Albert put on his best suit, the one he'd worn to Margaret's funeral. He polished his shoes. He practiced sitting up straight, practiced what he would say if called to testify. Kara was a wreck that morning, her hands trembling as she buckled Oliver into his car seat. But Albert was a rock beside her, calm and certain. "I've never had anyone show up for me like this," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. The courtroom was quieter than usual. Tense. After hours of testimony, the judge cleared his throat and spoke. "Kara Daniels," he said, "this court recognizes your growth, stability, and demonstrated commitment to your child. The court also acknowledges the testimony provided by Mr. Albert Jennings, whose role in your son's life has proven to be both consistent and deeply meaningful." Albert's eyes widened. He hadn't expected to be mentioned. "The decision of this court is to award full legal and physical custody of Oliver Daniels to his mother." Kara gasped. Albert reached over and grabbed her hand before she collapsed under the relief. She cried openly in the courtroom, not caring about the looks or the whispers. Oliver didn't understand what had just happened, but when he saw his mother's smile, raw, emotional, and radiant, threw his arms around her neck. Darren stormed out without a word. No one followed him. That night, Kara cooked dinner for Albert for the first time. She insisted, "It's about time I give back." It wasn't anything fancy: spaghetti, store-bought garlic bread, and a small chocolate cake she'd baked from a box. But to Albert, it tasted like a feast. They lit candles, played soft music, and laughed like family. "You know," Kara said after Oliver went to bed, "I used to wonder if I'd ever have a home again. Not just a roof, but a real home. A place with safety and warmth and love. And then I met you." Albert didn't know what to say. He just reached over and squeezed her hand. "You gave me more than money that day in the grocery store," she continued. "You gave me a lifeline. And you gave me a reason to wake up every morning," he said softly. The clock ticked quietly in the background. A breeze rustled through the open kitchen window. Then Kara said something that changed everything. "I was thinking of moving in." Albert blinked. "Moving in? Not permanently," she rushed to say, "but for a while, until I get back on my feet. It's just your house has so much room, and it's only you. And I wouldn't ask, but I've been looking at apartments and they're so expensive, and—" Albert held up a hand. "You and Oliver belong here," he said. "This house has been waiting for laughter again. For family. If you're comfortable here, then yes. Stay. As long as you want." Tears gathered again in Kara's eyes. And for the second time that night, she hugged him tightly, with gratitude pouring from every inch of her. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved us." Albert didn't answer immediately. He just looked around the kitchen, at the warm lights, the cake crumbs, the 2 extra plates in the drying rack. And he whispered back, "No, you saved me." They moved in the following weekend. Kara took the guest room, which quickly filled with baby toys and framed photos. Oliver claimed a corner for his blocks and trucks. And Albert? He smiled more than he had in a decade. He still took his morning walks and made his tea exactly the way Margaret liked it. But now he had someone to share breakfast with, someone to check in with, someone who asked how his day was, not out of politeness, but out of love. And every night, Oliver would ask for the same story at bedtime, the one about how Gramps helped Mama in the store when everything felt lost. "I'll never forget it," Kara told Albert one night. "I'll never stop telling him." "You don't have to," Albert said, gently tucking a blanket around Oliver. "Because I'll never stop living it." Weeks turned into months. Autumn painted the trees outside with warm hues of amber and gold. The once cold house on Magnolia Street now breathed with life. Laughter echoed in the hallways. Crayon drawings filled the refrigerator door. The guest room had officially become Oliver's room. And Kara? She was blossoming stronger, steadier, more sure of herself than ever before. Albert's days became purposeful again. He began waking up earlier just to make pancakes the way Oliver liked them, with chocolate chips in the shape of smiley faces. He repaired the backyard fence so Oliver could run freely. He even bought a second-hand swing set from a neighbor and installed it himself, refusing to let Kara lift a finger. "You're not just helping me anymore," Kara said one evening as they sat on the porch. "You're living with us. You're part of us." Albert smiled. "I never thought I'd be a family man again." She looked at him, full of something deeper than gratitude, something that felt like shared history, like unspoken belonging. "You are, Albert. You are family." That night, when he looked in the mirror, Albert didn't just see an old man with thinning hair and tired eyes. He saw a man reborn, not because he was younger, but because he was needed. One Sunday morning, Kara brought home something unexpected. "A laptop?" Albert asked, squinting at the brand-new box. "It's for you," she said, placing it on the table. "You said you always wanted to learn to write. Well, now's your chance." Albert chuckled. "I'm too old for computers." "You're never too old to start again." That sentence stuck with him more than she knew. With Kara's help, he learned to type slowly at first, fumbling with the keys like they were piano notes in the wrong octave. But soon, he was writing. Letters, journals, memories. He wrote about Margaret, how she danced barefoot in the kitchen. About his estranged son, how his pride had built walls too tall to climb. About the day at the grocery store when everything changed. And one evening, he let Kara read what he had written. She sat in silence for a long time after, then wiped her cheeks and said, "You should share this. People need to read it." Albert shook his head. "I just needed to let it out." But maybe letting it out is what helps others let theirs out too. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. Then came the letter. Not from the courts, or a friend, or even Kara. It was from his son. Albert found it one morning in the mailbox, tucked behind a stack of ads. His hands trembled as he opened it, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. "Dad, I heard from a cousin that you're living with a young woman and her son. At first I thought it was ridiculous. Then I thought maybe it's not. Maybe you're finally doing what I never let you do for me. I've been angry a long time. At you. At Mom. At myself. I blamed you for things that didn't make sense. I needed a place to put my grief, and you were the nearest wall. I know now that you didn't deserve it. I don't expect forgiveness for staying away, but I'd like to see you. I'd like you to meet your grandchildren. If you're willing. Your son, Daniel." Albert sat on the porch, reading the letter again and again. Kara came out with a mug of coffee and saw the look on his face. "What is it?" she asked softly. He handed her the letter. She read it slowly, then looked up. "Are you okay?" "I think I am," he said, his voice shaking. "I think I've waited a long time to read those words. Will you write back?" He nodded. "Yes, not out of anger. Not to fix everything overnight, but to open a door." Christmas came with snow that year. Soft, quiet flakes that blanketed the street in white stillness. Kara and Oliver decorated the house with Albert. They strung lights on the porch, baked cookies, and sang carols slightly off-key. It was the kind of Christmas Albert hadn't had in decades, not since Margaret was alive, not since Daniel was a boy. Then, on Christmas Eve, a car pulled into the driveway. Albert froze when he saw it, an unfamiliar SUV with tinted windows. The driver stepped out, a man in his 40s. Tall, worn, familiar. "Dad," Daniel said. Albert stepped down from the porch slowly. They stood facing each other in the snow. "I didn't know if I should come," Daniel said. "But then I thought maybe it's time." Albert didn't speak at first. He just looked at his son's face, the same jawline, the same tired eyes. Then he reached out, slowly, and Daniel stepped into the hub without resistance. It was quiet. No grand speeches. Just the sound of two hearts breaking and mending at once. Kara watched from the window, her hand over her mouth. Oliver tugged her sleeve. "Who is that?" "That," she whispered, voice catching, "is Gramps' son. They spent Christmas morning together. Albert, Daniel, Kara, Oliver, and Daniel's two daughters Emma and Sophie, who instantly took to Oliver like siblings separated by fate. There was hot cocoa, mismatched wrapping paper, too many cookies, and the warmth of something real. Family. Later, as the children played in the snow and Kara laughed with Daniel in the kitchen, Albert sat in his recliner, eyes glistening. He looked at the old photo of Margaret on the mantel. "You were right," he whispered. "Love never ends. It just waits for us to find it again." And that day, under a roof once heavy with silence, every empty corner of Albert Jennings' life was filled. Winter melted slowly into spring. The snowbanks receded. The trees budded. The sun stayed longer in the sky. And Albert Jennings, once just an old man keeping to himself in a quiet house, was now known around the neighborhood as Gramps. Not just by Oliver and Kara but by the mailman, the baker, the neighbors who saw him walking hand in hand with two little kids on each side, grinning wide as they skipped down the sidewalk. He no longer walked alone. He no longer ate alone. He no longer was alone. But he hadn't forgotten the years when silence was his only companion. In fact, those years had made him more attentive, more gentle, more fiercely protective of this fragile but beautiful new chapter in his life. Kara's life was changing, too. After finishing her training, she was offered a full-time position at a nonprofit organization supporting single mothers. It didn't pay much, but it paid something far more valuable: purpose. Each day she went to work, she knew she was lifting someone else out of the same darkness she had once faced. And every evening when she came home, Oliver would greet her at the door with a drawing or a hug, and Albert would have dinner ready, something warm, something simple, something made with care. Their life wasn't luxurious, but it was rich. One Thursday afternoon in early May, Kara came home early with a strange look on her face. Albert was in the garden, gently digging soil for the petunias Oliver had picked out. "You okay?" he asked, wiping his hands on a towel. She nodded, slowly. I'm more than okay. I just got a call." He waited. "They've invited me to speak at a regional conference next month. About my journey. They want to hear about the grocery store. About you. About everything." Albert smiled gently. "That's wonderful, Kara." "I said yes," she said, "because I want people to know that kindness is never small. That what you did changed the entire direction of my life. And maybe, just maybe, it'll make someone else stop and help a stranger when they least expect it." He looked at her with quiet pride. "You're going to be amazing." She looked down for a moment, then back at him. "I was thinking, would you come with me?" Albert blinked. "To the conference?" "You're a part of this story, Albert. You are the story. I want you beside me." He hesitated, then nodded. "Then beside you I'll be." The conference was held in a large city a few hours away. Albert hadn't traveled in years. But Kara made all the arrangements, booked the hotel, packed his clothes, even bought him a new tie. The night before her speech, they sat in the hotel lounge, Oliver asleep upstairs with Daniel's daughters, who had also come along for support. Daniel, now visiting every few weeks, had slowly begun to rebuild something real with his father. Forgiveness, it turned out, was like a garden. It took sunlight, time, and a willingness to pull out old roots. "You nervous?" Albert asked Kara. "Terrified," she admitted with a laugh. "But excited too." "You'll speak from the heart," he said. "That's what matters." She looked at him. "You know, I used to think I was the one who got lucky in that grocery store." He raised a brow. "But I think we both did," she continued. "Because that moment didn't just give me a future, it gave you back one too." Albert nodded slowly. "You're right. I thought my story had ended. But you reminded me chapters don't close unless we let them." The next day, Kara stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people. Albert watched from the front row, clutching the small program in his lap. Kara began, voice steady but thick with emotion. "I was a single mother with less than $5 to my name. Standing in line, humiliated, exhausted, and defeated. I was ready to return the milk and diapers that my baby needed. I was ready to give up." She paused, letting the weight of that moment settle into the room. And then a man I didn't know, an old man with kind eyes, stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. He just said, "Let me help." "It's not a handout. Just a hand." Gasps echoed in the room. Kara smiled, turning slightly toward Albert. That man changed everything. Not just because he paid for my groceries, but because he saw me. And in a world where people walk past each other every day, pretending not to notice, that was the greatest gift of all. People wiped their eyes. Even the moderator on stage sniffled. I went back to find him days later, Kara continued. And what I found wasn't just a kind stranger, but a grandfather to my son. A father figure to me. A man who had his own brokenness, but chose to turn it into something beautiful. Applause thundered through the room. After the speech, people lined up to speak with Kara, and Albert, shy, awkward, overwhelmed, stood back as dozens of attendees came up to shake his hand, thanking him for reminding them of humanity. That night, in the hotel room, Kara brought him a small box. "What's this?" he asked. "Just open it." Inside was a simple silver pin shaped like a heart and a helping hand. Engraved on the back were 4 words, "It started with you." Albert didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. Summer came with warmth and laughter. Daniel continued to mend his relationship with Albert. The kids played in the backyard. Kara thrived in her job, occasionally giving small talks to support groups. And Albert, in his quiet way, became a mentor to other older men who had lost their sense of place. He started writing again. This time, not just letters but a memoir. Kindness at the checkout line, a story of loss, redemption, and unexpected family. He didn't care if it ever got published. It was for Oliver, for Kara, for Daniel, for Margaret, for the version of himself that once believed life was finished. Because it wasn't. Not even close. On Albert's 79th birthday, the backyard was full of friends and family. Balloons, lemonade, barbecue, and the chaotic joy of children chasing each other barefoot in the grass. Kara handed him a card, handwritten in Oliver's wobbly penmanship. "Happy birthday, Gramps. I love you because you make pancakes and hugs." He laughed until he cried. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the party wound down, Kara sat beside him on the porch steps. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "The store." "Every day," Albert said, "because that was the moment I came back to life." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You saved me that day." "No," he said softly. "We saved each other." And in that golden hour, as laughter drifted from the yard and fireflies danced around them, an old man who thought his story was over smiled. Because the best chapters, it turned out, weren't the ones behind him. They were the ones he never saw coming.